Hi everyone, I finally did a poll about what video you would like me to respond to next, and the winner by a wide margin was this video, which I guess I'll just bring up now briefly. I might go off of it if I, say some other stuff, but gender critical arguments aren't just wrong there, and then the thumbnail says intellectually dishonest, a re-response to King Critical. So you can see there it says a re-response. The reason for that is that I had already responded to this person, that somebody said they wanted me to respond to this person's initial video. And I said, actually, I already have responded to their original video. But I thought, well, I'll do the next best thing, say, would you like me to respond to this person's re-response? There's a reason why I didn't respond to their re-response originally, like back when they made it. I was aware of it when they made it. This person has fewer subscribers than me. And I've always thought that if you are a large channel, you should, if somebody makes a response to you, you should respond to that response. However, if somebody keeps making responses to you and they're a much smaller channel, there is a point at which it makes sense to just ignore them, because it's always in their interest to keep responding to you. Like, here's the thing, if ContraPoints made a response video to me, I'm always going to keep making response videos, of course, because that's a massive advantage to my channel, to have a dialogue with a channel that's got significantly more subscribers than me. There's no way that ContraPoints is ever going to have the last word, so there's going to have to be a point at which ContraPoints or any other large YouTuber says, I'm just going to stop responding for me. I was like, I'll stop responding here. What you'll notice is that the video is quite long, 2 hours, 25 minutes. This is going to take... It would take at least 2 sessions, even if I just sat here, based on how long I aim for my videos to be, even if I just sat here watching it. So I will try and keep this, little ramble shorter, and, spoiler alert, basically, this will be what I respond to for the next 2 or 3 videos easily. What I will keep sending out feelers for suggestions. Maybe I'll even do polls and be like, hey, do you want me to continue responding to this video? Maybe. Perhaps you'd be like, oh, maybe you'll see the first part. Because for the record, I have not watched this video. I'm going in completely blind, as I usually do. Maybe we'll be like, oh, these responses are kind of rubbish. The funny thing is, of course, what you should maybe anticipate is that despite the fact I've got a lot of stuff to get through, this video will probably end up being kind of short, because I'm sure I'm going to be trying to let as much of it play without responding to it. And when I do that, I then edit that stuff out. Anyway, let's proceed.
He'd either admit that his claims were baseless, or actually provide said evidence. In his response to me, he has cited no studies or surveys, with the exception of stating a single statistic, which he didn't even provide a source for.
That does sound like something I would do, to be fair. Yeah, I for the record, I can't remember the original video, and I can't remember my response at all, which maybe I should have done my homework, but this is going to be kind of fun. Oh god, I've got to have to watch myself talk. Uh-oh. Wants to be treated like a typical female wants to be treated. Now, there are okay, so I remember now, remember me with long hair? I still haven't got my hair cut again since I got it cut short originally. I was saying to my wife that in some ways I actually feel like getting my hair cut a second time will feel more monumental than getting it cut the first time, in that will mean I'm officially committing to having short hair. Yeah, so the definition was... a woman is someone who wants to be treated the way a typical female would be treated. Which, let's hear what my problem is.
Now, to give some examples, on average, members of the male sex will want to be referred to by he/him pronouns, and want to be included in or given access to activities in workplaces and school, which are typically for members of the male sex.
For some reason, the quality of this video is going right down. I don't know if, the internet should be fine. I don't know why it's on auto. I'm gonna put it back on 1060, because there's absolutely no reason why it should be being all weird. Yeah, I'm already seeing all the issues with saying that a woman is someone who wants to be treated the way that a typical member of the female sex wants to be treated. Okay, so I'm going to try to word my issue right out the gate pretty clearly. There's only really 2 scenarios here. We essentially find ourselves in the classic trilemma, or I guess dilemma in this case, when it comes to trans identity. Because there's only two scenarios. Either one, you're going to mention things like you mentioned there, like being referred to by, I guess he was talking about a typical member of the male sex, being referred to by he, him pronouns, or being referred to by certain pronouns. The issue of that is that it's assuming that the main reason why people don't want that, the main reason why people want that is not because of simply believing in reality, right? Like, if someone asked me, do you want to be referred to as he, him? I would say yes, because that's accurate and I want people to describe me accurately. The issue is that if you then apply that logic to a trans-identified female and say, hey, do you want to be referred to by he, him pronouns? Then, if their justification is yes, because that would be accurate, well, the issue is you then kind of find yourself in a circular situation. So basically, using wanting to be referred to by he, him pronouns as part of your definition for man and woman is, in some sense, quite circular, because for most people, wanting to be referred to by he, him pronouns is conditional upon their initial understanding of what it means to be a man or woman. And I would say that even applies to trans-identified people too, right? Like a biological male, let's say, who wants to be referred to by she, her pronouns, isn't coming to that conclusion by like, well, I want to be treated the way a typical member of the female sex is treated, and they want to be referred to by she, her pronouns. No, what they're saying is, I'm a woman because of the specific way that I define the term woman, and that means based on that, I should be referred to by she, her pronouns. Now, the other thing you could say is that it's about more substantial things, like a typical average female wants to be, I guess, in a heterosexual relationship. But there are many trans-identified males who identify as trans lesbians. So they don't want to be treated the way a typical female is treated. But then even if you're referring to stuff that they do want, well, at that point you're reducing being a woman down to stereotypes. Like, it's in the name, right? Typical, stereotypical. So in general, this definition does jump out to me as just being messy on a lot of levels. Easily. Oh, hello. That was my meditation timer.
As long as a person wants to be treated in these ways, in over 50% of the situations, or the amount of weight they have in these traits is over 50%, though the percentage is debatable, they'll be considered a man under my definition.
So there you go, it's just over 50%, which, again, like, the issue is, so, let's say that over 50% of women, over 50% of members of the female sex want to have sex with men, or have sex with biological males, whatever. Then that would mean that gay men are women, right? Like, the issue is it's just so nebulous that you have to be accepting just that very specific things are meant by what exact things this typical biological female would want, that in sharing those desires makes you a trans woman. And also kind of exactly what it means for it to be a typical desire. Because, yeah, this would imply, like, his definition would imply that being in a heterosexual relationship is definitional to being a woman. Which is wrong. I don't want to be treated the way that a typical male wants to be treated, but I also don't want to be treated the way a typical female wants to be treated. So, presumably that means I don't have a gender identity.
This is incorrect. I have no clue how King Critical didn't catch this, because he had my definitions up on the screen, and presumably that means that he has read them. It stated that those persons who want to be treated either as both a member of the male sex and as a member of the female sex, or neither, will be considered as non-binary.
Wait, why was that wrong? That wasn't incorrect, I just gave one specific example. I don't know. I was going to say I might like do like a thing. I know like some people when they're doing responses on top of responses, they make some parts of it, because I'm definitely going to be playing clips of me talking. But yeah. I feel like one of the things about my long hair is that I did like it, but I liked it when it was shoulder length, and occasionally I let it grow. So I liked it when it was like cut here. Once it started draping onto my shoulders, I really don't like the way it looked. So I wish that this particular video had been from when I'd cut it to shoulder length. I said that if you don't want to be treated the way a typical member of either sex wants to be treated, that makes you non-binary. He responded, well, actually, it's either treated, or so if you want to be treated the way both of them are treated, or neither, then you're non-binary. Well, yeah, okay, so that means that, like, so that includes the definition I said. So it's not wrong. It just, what? Like, that's not wrong, it's just me only saying part of the definition. But you're allowed to say part of the definition.
My definitions aren't assuming that there is a concrete, typical way members of the male sex and members of the female sex want to be treated, but rather that whatever way they want to be treated, which differs to that of the other sexes, is what I mean by wanting to be treated like a typical member of the male or female sex. Next, King Chris.
That doesn't seem substantially different, right? Like, what you're saying is, well, yeah, it's not just the way they typically want to be treated, it's the way they want to be treated that is different from the typical way that a member of the opposite sex would be treated. Did he say like, I'm just trying to work out what the substance there is, because I'm thinking, like, surely there, like, my all women are definitionally heterosexual thing would apply, right? Because that is different. That is a difference between the typical female and the typical male. But the other issue is that I really don't see how this isn't just a woman is someone who identifies as a woman with extra steps if you're taking it for granted that his main examples of how typical women want to be treated is basically, typical females want to be treated is as women, basically being referred to by she, her pronouns, being part of women's groups, blah, blah, blah. Well, at that point, what you're saying is that, like I say, a woman is someone who wants to be treated the way a typical female wants to be treated, and the specific examples of the way a typical female wants to be treated are in a way such that they are referred to and treated as being a woman. So, you take out the extra steps there and you're basically just saying a woman is someone who wants to be considered a woman, aka a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. There seems to be this admission that biological sex is an important referent here. That basically the reason we have this idea of masculinity, that seems like kind of a stupid thing to say. Like, that's a stupid criticism from me, because this person's been consistently using biological sex as an important referent, because, like, obviously saying that you're sort of the way a typical male or typical female wants to be treated. I don't know if that's a response going to be made, but that's an issue there with what I said. Like, it's not significant, this person's admitting that biological sex matters, because they've been referring to biological sex throughout this whole thing, is because there is a certain particular way that biological males are supposed to act.
Not how members of the male sex are supposed to act, but how they do act, typically, or on average. No doubt that this can change over time, and the specifics of gender.
That's fair enough, yeah. While I think there is kind of a relationship between how somebody acts and the expectations of how they react, and one thing will influence the other. Yeah, I shouldn't have said supposed to when that's not what Sentient Darkness said.
They often try their hardest to be seen as members of the male sex, or if they think that how they should be treated should depend on how they want to be treated, rather than their sex. The way I mean offended here is less like insulted and more like caused upset, since I don't think any...
So there's a whole point being made that I don't really care about you, like... I'm only 6 minutes into the video, man, and I'm already approaching when I want to stop my recording session. Like, I'm already over halfway through what I wanted to be my scheduled recording session for this video. But with that said, I'm just going to ignore what was said here pretty much. But I just keep getting back to the fact that there's this idea that wanting to be treated as a biological male literally is being presented as just wanting to be called a man. And I just can't get over how obviously circular that is.
Sex, or if they think that how they should be treated should depend on how they want to be treated, rather than their sex.
Like, you're just saying, I want to be called a man. And that's, how is that any different from just saying, I am a man because I identify as a man, which is, of course, circular.
Next, King Critical dodges the hypothetical I proposed to make sense of the situation of why trans people are upset by being misgendered.
The question is, how would I feel if I was magically turned into a biological female and was thus regarded as a biological female? And that's interesting. I've spoken about this before in a variety of different contexts. Like, this is something I've returned back to since, so I'm interested to see what I say here. But the fact that I apparently dodge it makes me think I probably don't have as substantial as a response as I do now, and I've presented my response to that question now. I won't burden this video with it, but yeah, I definitely have more sophisticated opinions on it, so let's see what I say here. It's an interesting question. Obviously, it's a question which doesn't relate to reality immediately, because that's not a thing that happens. But, it's an interesting hypothetical to see to what extent I do think that, your biology should be the only determinant in whether or not you're a man or woman. If we're talking about somebody actually becoming, that their biology gets transformed, would I still agree with that?
Hypotheticals don't have to relate to reality fully, as long as the key elements being compared are there.
Yeah, so I'm not even going to play what I said there. It was rambly, I didn't really say anything. So the question is, let me see. The question was, how would you feel, well, you kind of probably already heard it because I probably already played it. How would you feel if you were in the body of a biological female? And wouldn't that mean that I wanted to be treated the way a typical biological male would be treated? And therefore that makes sense. Well, no, what I would say is that if I decided that I still wanted to be thought of as a man, I would say that I want to be treated in a way that is congruent with the initial, or the kind of the biological material referent of my initial biological sex before I magically switched into a female body, which is not the same thing as saying I want to be treated the way a typical male would be treated. In fact, it would almost be incoherent for me to justify my nascent trans identity if I was magically switched into a woman's body with the idea of, well, I want to be treated the way a typical biological male would be treated, because, well, I was a typical biological male. It's not comparable to say I want to be treated the way a typical biological male wants to be treated and therefore I'm a man. What would be more accurate to say is I'm a man because I was born and lived my whole life as a biological male, and then just magically, inexplicably became biologically female, but having, grown up biologically male and having had that initial referent of being biologically male, that's why I'm a man. And therefore that's why you should refer to me as a man. And, insofar as referring to me as a man is a way that typically a biological male is treated, that's what you're talking about, not what this person's saying. That analogy does not force me in any sense to adopt or recognize the legitimacy of this person's position.
Now let's take your mom, King Critical. Let's
take my mom.
All of the information and beliefs her brain holds, and now transfer it into the body of an average member of the male sex. The first question is she of the female sex? Obviously not, because now the phenotype of the body your mom has is centered around small gamete production, meaning your mom is of the male sex. But if you take gender to be the same as sex, does that mean that your mom is now a man?
Okay, so that seems like basically the same analogy as if it happened to me, which I've already addressed. But just replacing it with my mum. And I guess the same point holds of, well, if by changing literally every single aspect, if you mean you're switching every single aspect of her brain, including her personality and her identity, well, yeah, we might still say she's a woman because she initially accurately identified as a woman based on the initial referent of being biologically female. And again, magically changing into the body of a biological male, you could say, well, that's a change that doesn't necessarily override the, her identity based on the initial referent of her biological sex. That's a very reasonable thing, I think, to say. So, yeah, it doesn't, you could say, well, that proves that it's not really about biology, because you're saying in that situation, her biology would be different. But the point is, what I'm saying there is actually, it's still about your biology. It's just not necessarily about your current biology, right? So yeah, in this scenario, which is again a completely hypothetical scenario where we're talking about people magically changing sex, we could imagine that somebody might identify as a man or woman based on their initial biology rather than their current biology. And I don't think that is inaccurate. And I don't think that means that we're not making biological sex the exclusive determiner of whether you're a man or woman. It's just a question of which biological sex, the biological sex you initially had or the biological sex you had post magic sex transformation.
The only reason in this hypothetical that your mom should still be considered your mom and a woman is because of her mental traits, which will be things like wanting to be treated like a typical member of the female sex wants to be treated.
Okay, no, see, what it actually would be, the mental trait would be a identity as a woman based on having initially been biologically female. That would be the mental state that justifies, or mental trait rather, that justifies her existence as being a woman. Not just that she wants to be treated as a woman. If my dad decided he wanted to be treated as a biological female, that would not be the same or even close to equivalent to my mum as someone who was biologically female, who has now magically become biologically male, saying she still wants to be treated as a biological female, which is to say recognized as a woman, because obviously the only reason she's suddenly become biologically male is basically magic.
An even better hypothetical for this is, if your mom's mind is uploaded into a machine which she can use
That's not what my mum looks
as a body, it certainly can't be said that such an individual is a member of the female sex, because her body is nothing like that of a human, but to say that she no longer has a gender is absurd.
Okay, so that's another interesting sort of like that example. I don't think I'd say it's even better. I would say it's pretty much the same, and the same logic applies, although I think it gives a better example of getting to my point, which is, like I say, that yes, we are defined as, or we can be understood as men or women based on our identities, but the point is, what's the justification for our identities? What I'm objecting to is, with the gender identity self-ID thing, the circularity of it. So there is nothing circular in saying, if I were put into the body, if my brain were put into the body of a robot and that robot had no sex, we could still talk of me as being a man because I am a man based on the fact I say I'm a man, on the fact I self-ID as a man? No. Based on the fact that I was initially biologically male. Now, what you could say is, well, what about AI that is intended to copy and basically appear aesthetically like a man or like a biological male? So, you see things like, and this is just the analogy that immediately comes to mind, but there's many examples of this there's Hal, right, from 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I'm thinking about Holly from Red Dwarf. If you've seen Red Dwarf, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, well, Holly is the AI computer that's in charge of the ship, basically has a personality and is regarded as a man. People will refer to Holly by male pronouns, and it would be pretty obviously weird for someone to refer to Holly with female pronouns and say she, although there is like a whole thing later on, now I'm thinking about it, where Holly does become a woman, so that was maybe a weird analogy. Like, that's a funny analogy for that reason, because of course Holly is also Holly's actually a woman's name, like ordinarily, so I don't really know why there ever was a man called Holly in the first place. Anyway, the point is, you could have a situation there where there is somebody who is a computer but seems like a woman. But again, this kind of gets like a whole other issue, right? Because I'm playing Civilization. I'm often playing Civilization. If I'm not working, I'm playing Civilization, and usually, to be honest, I'm working while playing Civilization, because it's like, if I go back and forth on this. Sometimes I think it interferes with the quality of the editing, but sometimes if there's a period of editing where I'm mostly comfortable with what I'm saying, or I'm just listening through, let's say, like I'm just listening through a video to make sure everything's okay, what am I going to do? Just sit there vacantly staring at my screen? Like, no, like if there's not too much editing that's likely to be needed and I'm just giving it a final check through to make everything's okay, I'm going to be playing Civilization. And on Civilization, they have, as you probably know, leader heads. I mean, this is, again, I'm picking a very specific example for something which is a point that applies very broadly, because really what I'm talking about is the fact that, in general, in computer games, you have people who look like women or men, but they're not actually biologically male or female, because they are, in fact, computer simulations. I mean, is Marge Simpson a biological female? There's many examples of this kind of question. And again, what I'm talking about, so I just want to clarify, because obviously I'm going off on a bit on my own ramble. This is not directly relevant to Sentient Darkness's point, because Sentient Darkness's point was, what if somebody who was biologically male had their body magically moved into, or magically, scientifically, I guess, moved into a computer? And in that sense, I think you can say without too much difficulty, well, that person is still a man because they were biologically male. And that is the justification for and the reasoning for considering them to be a man, and there is nothing circular there. In this case, when we're talking about, like I say, examples of fictional characters or artificially computer-generated characters, whether they have their own consciousness or not, again, you could get into the question of what exactly does it mean to be a consciousness. It's kind of a bit of a mind trip to think that there is, in theory, a complete continuum or continuity between the, like, Civilization leaderhead who has only a few basic responses to any given situation and is pretty clearly programmed to react in certain ways, and then like something like ChatGPT, which is a lot more sophisticated but is undeniably programmed, to something that we see in like science fiction with a character like Holly from Red Dwarf, and many other examples, C-3PO. I could go on, where they actually seem to have genuine personalities, even though all you're dealing with is increasingly sophisticated programming. And of course, that's when you get into the real mind F, which is, well, actually, are human beings that different, or are we just programmed by the initial conditions of physics and chemistry and our upbringing and all these things that are beyond our control? And then we don't have free will anymore, but that's just its own thing. The real question, sorry, I realize that we're not even 10 minutes in and I'm going off on this whole thing, but I think it's a really interesting question. What do we do about these things, these characters that do not have a biology at all, but we would still clearly think of them as men or women? And in that context, I would say that we're basically just supposed to understand them as being like men or women. But again, the initial referent there is the reality of men and women existing, which is based on biological sex. But the thing is, it's not a referent that exists for these people individual. Like, why is Marge Simpson a woman? Because she is depicted in a way that your typical woman would be depicted, and the reason why women are women is because of biological sex. So essentially what I'm saying there is that there is, within that context, a logic for defining people as women or men, not based on their own biological sex, but based on the fact that you can infer they are supposed to be women or men, in the sense that we are women or men, which is to say, with reference to our biological sex, except in that case, their biological sex is kind of fictional. That's basically what I would say. Like I say, that wasn't really the point Sentient Darkness was making, but it is a point which I think is difficult. I've been wanting to make a video on my channel for a little while now about like the use of gendered pronouns when referring to inanimate objects, but yeah, we'll get onto that at some point. That's insulting me. I was like, well, why are you placing so much stock in this sexist nonsense?
Once again, I don't think this use of insult is accurate, because I think trans people are way more likely to be upset by not passing as a certain gender. And like with the next point I'm going to talk about.
Well, hold on, I don't think that's really responding to my point. You're saying that a woman is someone who wants to be treated the way a typical female wants to be treated, and and you're also saying it's incredibly insulting to not refer to a so-called trans woman as a woman. But so how is that not a trans woman saying, well, I want to be treated the way a typical female wants to be treated. In other words, I want to be treated all of these kind of ways that are, well, like I say, stereotypical, typical, it's in the name. They're being insulted by that. Again, of course, you run into the fact that this person has given an example of like, well, the stereotypical way they want to be treated or typical way they want to be treated is just being referred to as a woman, but then that's circular. So again, we're in that double bind, right? Because then if you try to define it with reference to other things, like, for example, the fact that a typical woman wants to be in a relationship with a man, well, in that case, you're saying that heteronormativity, which is a type of stereotype, in some way validates somebody's womanhood. And in that case, I would say, well, it's not reasonable for that person to be offended that their heteronormative definition of woman is rejected by some.
But it doesn't follow from being upset by not passing as a certain gender to someone that you hold some sexist belief, as you can also believe the way that people of certain sexes act and look can change over time, along with definitions of gender and gender expression, which will be based.
Okay, I don't really know what that's not about, but basically what I've said before is that I think and I think this is, I'm quite comfortable saying this, if you are really offended and really upset and place a lot of emotional stock in the idea of being considered a man or woman, that has to be on some level sexist, because you have to believe that there is in some way some kind of value judgment attached to being a man or woman. Now, yeah, obviously, and I think people have pointed this out, well, because we live in a society where that is kind of true, that's why people might be insulted. You know, if people, when I was a kid, if someone would have like called me a girl and been like, girl, you're a girl, hey Michael, you girl, maybe I would have been insulted. As an adult, like, I had to say as a kid there, because it's almost impossible for me to imagine that happening or that mattering to me as an adult. But basically, okay, fine. But trans-identified people, when they say, oh, I'm upset that someone's calling me a man instead of a woman, they're not saying, oh, I'm upset about that because I'm interpreting that as like, oh, society uses these terms as insults. No, they genuinely think that is in and of itself an insult. There is a massive difference between if, like, let's say my kid comes home, I don't have a kid, but, you know, hypothetical future kid, my son. I always think it's easier, like, I get, like, people say, oh, trans-identified females get ignored. I think it's always easier to keep things simpler and just assume we're generally talking about trans-identified males most of the time. If my son comes home and says, oh, someone called me a girl and it made me really sad. This is how my kid talking like an adult man. But, you know, someone called me a girl and made me really sad. Then I would say, well, I can recognize that, of course, that person was probably trying to insult. This, again, is not exactly how I would necessarily talk to my kid. I'm just saying the feelings I would have that I would maybe try to express in a way that would be accessible to a child. I can recognize that you're upset about that because that person was clearly trying to bully you and trying to denigrate you, but you should know that there is nothing wrong with being a girl. And the fact of the matter is, you quite simply are not a girl, so you can object based on it being inaccurate. But if someone's likening you to a girl, then maybe that bothers you because that's not how you want to present yourself. But, you know, you can't force people to think about you in the way you want to be presented. You can only, you know, try to be the person you're comfortable being and hope people are receptive to that. But if they're not, well, what matters is, are you happy with how you are? You know, if you felt you were acting like a girl and you didn't like acting like a girl, well, that's your own kind of situation to change. But if you feel like you're not acting like a girl and yet someone's saying you are acting like a girl, well, who cares, right? I guess they're wrong, or you just have no reason to believe them. But again, there's nothing wrong with acting like a girl. It would be fine if you did act like a girl, because acting like a girl is basically just a nonsense gender construct. It doesn't affect, like, that's pretty much what I would communicate in one way or another. That's different from another situation where someone comes home and says, somebody told me that I am in fact a boy, but I hate the idea of being a boy and I want to be a girl instead. And that really made me upset. And then I'd say, well, why do you hate the idea of being a boy? Being a boy doesn't mean anything. It just means being the sex you are, and there's nothing you can do to change the reality of your own body. The only thing you can do, the healthiest thing you can do, is accept your own body. And the fact that you think it is insulting to be considered a boy, and that it would be in some way complimentary to be considered a girl, when there's no indication, like there's no actual reality to any insult there. Even if the person you're talking to was trying to insult you, you can feel upset they were trying to insult you, but there is no substance to saying you're a boy or you're a girl as an insult, because that would be to suggest that to be a man or woman or a boy or girl is a value judgment, which would be in some sense suggesting that, basically men and women have different values, and that's a very bad attitude to have, because ultimately all human beings have values, and being a boy or girl, man or woman is just their biological sex, which doesn't have to affect them in any significant way, basically. They're two different situations, is the point I hope you can see.
Because they don't think just being feminine is what it takes to be a woman. Perhaps trans people should also try to push.
But, here's the thing, you're saying that, but I guess also by your logic, if most women wanted to be feminine, then it would be true, because of course the definition of a woman is somebody who wants to be treated the way a typical female wants to be treated. Then the definition of a woman would be someone who wants to be treated feminine, So, according to you, the only thing that is affecting that is whether or not most women want to be treated in a feminine, or most typical members of the female sex want to be treated in a feminine way. And by the way, I think there's an argument to be made that most women, most biological females, it's really annoying talking about this, because my instinct is to use the word woman to mean biological female, because I think that's what makes the most sense. But, I have to say biological female or female. The thing is, I do remember there was a thing a while ago where it was I think it was on Reddit, where it became a stereotype that neckbeards tend to use the word female. Oh look, it's a female, blah blah blah. I think it's got something to do with the Ferengi. They use the word female. Anyway, sorry. Basically, I think there's an argument that could be made that most females, your typical female, does want to be treated feminine. Now, I don't know. I've not taken, I'm not done a survey, but I think a lot of females, the same way a lot of males want to be masculine, a lot of females do want to be feminine. Not everybody is gender critical, and even people who are gender critical might still have a particular preference themselves, even though they don't think it should be an enforced social construct. They may personally, the idea of being feminine. So, again, it would seem like if your definition is a woman is someone who wants to be treated the way a typical biological female wants to be treated, then a woman is someone who wants femininity, right?
This is a complete dodge. If you understand even a little bit about propositional logic, you'll know that the claim King Critical made, which can be boiled down to if trans people are offended by being misgendered, then they hold the sexist belief, requires proof. If he is unable to show a contradiction between holding a belief that men and women are of equal value and being offended by being misgendered, then it's possible for trans people to be offended and not be sexist.
Okay, to clarify the point, I don't really think it's possible that, it's certainly possible someone can believe that men and women are of equal value. The point is they think they're valued differently, meaning there's different benefits to being one or the other. Because to be insulted by something, that has to be on some level related to your values. If you called me stupid, I'm insulted by that. Why? Because I think that being smart is a good value. Now, there are examples where you could say that people might value things not necessarily differently, or think that one thing is better than the other, but just for them, one thing is better than the other. And that's maybe what's going on with man or woman. So it's not necessarily someone saying, oh, you're calling me a man, that offends me because being a woman is better than being a man. But what they are saying is, you're calling me a man, that offends me because I value being a man differently from being a woman. But again, I can't think of a single example of where I could feel insulted in a way that would be completely devoid of values. And sometimes you could say, well, that insult comes from people, using language incorrectly, although nowadays that just annoys me. Like, the really good example I think of all the time is that because I'm a little bit weird, I don't actually, like, maybe this is one of my more controversial takes, I don't think I'm that weird. But basically, I've pretty much been how I am for most of my life. And at several points growing up and whatever, people have called me autistic. And sometimes they've said it in a way too directly, like as if to really insult me, like, "Oi, you're autistic, you autistic person." Other times they've said it in a way which feels like they're maybe trying to just make an honest statement, but it also feels like on some level they're trying to, I don't know, get at something. Like, I remember one time, like, there was one, like, girl who I was dating, but it wasn't particularly serious at all. And I wasn't massively fond of her as a person in the end. But basically, and this is an example of one of that, there was something that, it doesn't matter what, but it was something I wanted to tell her. And I was like, "Oh, there's something I've got to tell you." And she was like, "Is it that you're autistic?" But, like, it was like a very weird thing. And it almost felt like it was very strange. But that's kind of the point I'm getting at here, which is I didn't really feel insulted by that, but it kind of did feel a little bit like because she was kind of in a bad mood with me or whatever. So it kind of felt like there was supposed to be a negative thing to it. But this is the main point. I was mostly just annoyed with the fact that that's inaccurate. As far as I understand autism, I'm really not autistic. And I think it's very stupid for people to take what I actually am, which is just a little bit weird in some ways, and conflate that with autism, because that's stupid and it's inaccurate. Again, is it insulting? Well, no, because there's nothing wrong with being weird and there's nothing wrong with being autistic. So the proper response to it is just to be annoyed by people conflating those two things in a really simplistic way, which demonstrates a level of ignorance. And maybe you could kind of feel insulted by the fact that person is using this language and hasn't bothered to learn about it. But again, that actually does have a value judgment to it, which is, if you're going to talk about something, you should know what you're talking about. And it suggests a lack of care to be accurate in describing things. The same way you might be insulted if your significant other gave you a present that was something you didn't want at all. You'd be insulted because you would perhaps quite correctly interpret that as them telling you that they don't value you enough. And again, I'm using that word value you enough to actually bother to learn what you want and what your preferences are. So again, that's an example where you'd be insulted, and what is it about? Values. But again, when you talk about values, like if I'm insulted because someone calls me a bigot, that's a value thing. It's almost impossible for me to think of a single example where I would be insulted. I can't imagine anything. But again, not necessarily saying like, therefore you think that one thing is better than the other, but simply that you think those two things are valued differently. Like, let's make the transracial analogy, because it always works. I love the transracial analogy. If someone says, "Hey, you're black," and you're incredibly insulted by that, that suggests, unless there's like some other thing going on, like maybe, you know, in some way it indicates like there's something about you and your relationship to black which indicates that they don't know something and like they haven't bothered to pay attention to something or whatever, or I don't know. But the main point is, so I was trying to think of like some exceptions, but I can't even really bother to think of them, because the main point is, well, generally speaking, if your reaction to being told that you're black is to be horrendously insulted and really upset by it, I don't see how that couldn't suggest that you are placing some kind of value on being a member of a particular race, and that's bad. Right, so we're actually at the end of the my recording session. I have a schedule, and maintaining that schedule is very, very good for me. I love maintaining that schedule. It allows me to be productive. It allows me to get things done. The issue is, sometimes it gets thrown off by things, And if it gets thrown off by something at a very particular point, then it throws off that particular thing. And today, what threw things off is that my uncle gave me some clothes, and I had to decide which clothes I wanted to keep. So I was trying to do it quite quickly, but I was also thinking, I really should get to recording my video because I was doing it during my video recording time. I'm actually 3 or 4 minutes over when I should have stopped. But yeah, so I think I had about 20 minutes less time dedicated to recording than I should have had. And look at that, we've made it 14 minutes into the video. Uh-oh. So I'm going to, going forward, I think I should be able to dedicate the full... So basically, I always give myself an hour and 20 minutes to record, because I'm like, that should give me enough to make a video, but in this case, I only spent an hour recording. So, whatever. I'll edit this down, but it will probably end up being... Well, I don't know, maybe it won't even be that short, but either way, we'll make our way through this video eventually. I'm going to try to get through a little bit more of it every single time. We'll see. Probably next time not going to do any kind of preamble or post-amble or anything like that. But thank you for watching, and I will see you all next week. Do let me know what videos you'd be interested in me responding to after this, but I feel like we're probably going to have to make our way through this video, at a snail's pace. No, we're going to do better. We're going to get through more of it next time, I promise. Bye.